Hello, in this video we're going to talk a little bit about the placenta, the umbilical cord, and kind of the interaction between mom and baby from that aspect. So when we have an embryo, that is an egg that is fertilized, becoming an embryo, we need a way for that to implant into mom, so mom can provide nutrients, so baby can get rid of their waste products, and we're going to need an umbilical cord and a placenta in order to do that. So first up we have mom. A lot of factors are going to play into how healthy mom is and how well this umbilical cord, or this placenta, actually, the placenta is going to be forming. So first up is just general health of mom. So how healthy is she? How well does she take care of herself? Does she exercise? Does she have any presence of any other diseases, environmental exposures, anything like that? Next up, we have chronic diseases. So does she have diabetes? Does she have hypertension? Those are things that are really going to be important to see that you're definitely going to be exposed to in the future. So either any type of chronic disease or even an acute illness can come into play here. The next up is a big one, is nutrition. So this goes both ways. So this is overnutrition or undernutrition. The overnutrition is a little interesting. But first, undernutrition. We all know what that is. That is not eating enough. Maybe you're starving, you're in a resource-limited area, and you aren't able to get high-quality, nutrient-dense foods. So that's all going to play into that factor there. Or overnutrition. Are you eating a lot of calories that don't have a lot of nutritional value? So is your dietary source of carbohydrates mainly Dr. Pepper and Mountain Dew, versus are you eating your fruits, your vegetables, your complex carbohydrates, those type of things. So they're all going to be a big factor into the development of the placenta and how well this baby has nutrients and nutrition available for them to grow. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the placenta. And we're going to change color just a little bit so we can talk more about this. So we have our placenta, and it has a couple functions. First up, we got our respiratory. So let's draw a little set of lungs here. So we have respiratory functions. So CO2 out, oxygen coming in. That's going to be important for that. It's also going to do a few things with filtration. So getting rid of the waste products from the baby, making sure that those don't sit in there, anything like that. And then we talked about nutrition already. It's a big part of it. Nutrition. And then we have another thing is immunity. So immune function, it can transport some important things to the baby, the big one being immunoglobulins G. And lastly, the placenta itself functions as an endocrine organ. So it has a couple important functions here. The big one is maintaining pregnancy. So a woman's normal menstrual cycle is going to have a couple stages. Once you get towards the end, it's going to say, I did not have an egg implant, and then you're going to start your period. And what's going on here is we need hormones to tell the body that, wait, there was implantation, hold off for hopefully 9 months before you restart this normal monthly cycle. So we have some hormones that are going to come into play. One of these ones here is the progesterone. That's one of the big important ones. So this is the one that's going to do what's called maintain the endometrium. During pregnancy. So we want to have enough progesterone so that this woman's body knows that she doesn't need to shed that lining. You keep it around because it's going to be in use. Next one we have is HCG, or human chorionic gonadotropin. This is what's going to show up when you take that pregnancy test. You get your lines or anything like that. So when you're actually, a woman's peeing on that test, that's what it's going to pick up, is that human chorionic gonadotropin. And then lastly is just your estrogen. All right, so we have all those that are going to go into play. Now let's look a little bit more about the umbilical cord. now. So we have our umbilical cord. We're going to draw over on this side. We're going to make a big circle here. So this is if we did a cross section. So we sliced our umbilical cord in half, and we're just going to take a peek at it. We're going to draw what we got inside. So we are going to have over here, we've got 2 arteries. And on our other side, we're going to have 1 big vein. All right, remember that in terms of arteries and veins, they're just describing the direction the blood's flowing either to or from the heart. So we've got 2 of these little arteries and 1 vein. And surrounding this, we'll make this little color here, is this goopy, jello-y fluid stuff that's kind of gross. But we have this called Wharton's jelly. So it's not Smucker's, it's a little bit more gross than that, but we have our Wharton's jelly. And yeah, we'll leave that there for now. So coming down to our baby, we have our little baby here. We're gonna make this a little bit blue because there's some other stuff we want to take into consideration. We have a baby with an umbilical cord to a placenta, but we also have amniotic fluid that surrounds the baby. And the amniotic fluid is a careful balancing act, which we're going to get into some big detail about that in another video shortly. Now let's talk about our baby. So we have a baby here. After that egg is fertilized, we have this 2-week period. And during this period, we have, hopefully what's going on is implantation. So we want that fertilized egg to attach to the uterine wall. It's going to essentially bury itself in there nice and good. It's going to help a lot of these hormones and processes start. That way that develops a placenta up there. We're going to connect it to an umbilical cord to our baby. If anything happens to go wrong around this period, usually it's just going to fail implantation. It'll be out spontaneously as an spontaneous abortion, so it just won't implant, and we won't have anything good there. Next up, we have, if that all goes well, we have weeks 2 to 8, which has been identified as, or we can consider it a critical period. So this is when a couple important things are going on. The big one is that gastrulation. So this is when the cells of this baby are turning into what they're going to be for the rest of this person's life. So gastrulation, during this time we're going to have what's going on is differentiation. So we have all these cells that are now determining what are we going to turn into, what is our future goals in terms of what we're going to be. And we have a couple things going on. We're going to need some different colors for this. So first up, we have all these stem cells coming out from this baby. And what's going on here is we have a few things forming. One of them is ectoderm. And this ends up being the nervous system and the skin. Next up, we need our red. And this is what's in our middle. We have what's called mesoderm. And this is going to become our bone, muscle, connective tissue, and your vascular system. And then lastly, let's get this green here. On the other side of it, we have what's called endoderm. This is going to end up being your lungs, your urinary system, and your digestive system. Okay, so it's really important that this period between 2 to 8 weeks is a healthy period where the baby's getting all the nutrition that they need, that mom is not going to be exposed to any type of environmental toxins, she's not taking any medications, she's not being exposed to, alcohol or drugs. But the interesting thing is when we're in, interesting, unfortunate thing, during this 2-week period, a lot of moms, that's when they don't know they're pregnant. It's in that first month, month or two. It may be, they're thinking it's a late period, a missed period, anything like that. And it can cause a lot of things to happen to the baby. And it's unfortunate that it's just that time period where you don't know what's going on. You don't know that you're pregnant, and it can cause some problems for the development of this baby, because all these systems are developing at this point. After that 7-8 week mark, in terms of structures, most of them are built, they're in place. They only need to get bigger and a little more well developed. So this is the critical period. If stuff can go bad in terms of teratogens, it's going to happen in this 2 to 8 weeks. If it happens in the 0 to 2 weeks, it's just going to abort, and then it's going to recognize that, hey, we're not going to be able to create a human out of this, and then it's just going to flush itself out, unfortunately. But that's what we need to pay attention on, that aspect of it. So we're going to talk about the placenta in depth in another one, but let's talk a little bit just about what's going on. Now let's do the placenta first, or the umbilical cord first. So we have a couple things that can go on in our umbilical cord. So we have an anomalies we're going to put down on this side. So let's talk about anomalies. Okay, we have two different types. Fistulas, and we have an omphalocele. So with our fistulas, we have two types. So these are holes that are going to develop into the umbilical cord that are going to cause some problems. We have what's called vitelline, and this is going to be a connection with poop. So your digestive system somehow got into there. There's going to be some type of poop-like discharge or meconium-like discharge coming out of that umbilical cord. Then we have next up what's called the urancle or uranca or urancle fistula. You might hear like a patent uranchus, anything like that, and this is P. So you've got it connecting to the urinary tract somehow in there. Then the umbilicale is something that can go on with the umbilical cord, where a lot of stuff's herniating out through that, which is its own video in itself once we get into that topic. So up here we've got our single umbilical artery. Okay, so we look back here, we say we're supposed to have 2 arteries, 1 vein. Sometimes that one of them, for whatever reason, doesn't develop, and we are left with a single vessel or artery. So we have a vein, but we only got 1 artery. And this can be due to a couple things. You can have just atresia. So we have a normal vessel, and it just happens to stop forming. We have agenesis of a normal vessel, where we had the artery there that was developing, it was forming, and for whatever reason it just decided it was going to stop. And lastly, we have a persistent allantus. Of the body stalk. So once we're in our development, we have 3 structures that are going to go into play in how this baby goes from being, just an egg into its connection to its mom and the umbilical cord. We have a body stalk there and a couple things that 2 other forms that go into here, and that's going to form our baby's umbilical cord, and that's going to be the communication between infant and mom. Now, how does this happen? Well, one of the ones they used to say, or a big historical thing, I guess we'd think about it, is our genetics. Sometimes it just happens. I'm going to draw a little DNA thing to make us think about genetics. And one of the things that they used to teach, they said, if you've got an infant with a single umbilical cord, you're going to make sure you do a workup for a couple things. Well, that's debatable. A lot of those things aren't really, they haven't been able to strongly link it to things, but it has been linked with, let's get our right color here, some cardiac problems, and also GI. Because again, you think down here, we had urinary system, intestinal system problems that could happen. So those are developing around the same time in the same area. So there's a pretty good understanding that, okay, that might be a problem there. So right now, they're not really saying that if you have just a single umbilical cord, unless you have some other type of anomaly present, it's not super important that you work that things up, but keep it in the back of your mind while you're doing your assessment on your kiddo. Another big one is just simple hypertension, could lead to it. So we're doing our blue ring because we've got diabetes. And then lastly, we've got our tobacco. So tobacco is another big potential cause for that. So that's what we have on that end of things. Now let's look a little bit closer at what's going on with this baby. So we talked about the umbilical cord. So we've got our umbilical cord here. Zoom in a little bit. So this is what we got going on in the uterus. We've got our baby, we've got the sac it's in, we've got the connected here, we've got a placenta, the rest of the uterine cavity, and we got a couple things going on. So first up, let's talk about it. So we've got one side of this, which is going to be the chorion, the chorionic cavity. And this is what can be considered the maternal part of the placenta. So we've got a maternal part and we've got a fetal part. So that's the maternal part. And then we have the amnion, or the amniotic membrane. So we'll just throw that in here. And this is what is considered our fetal part. So we have the sac-like membrane that's going to be surrounding the baby. Inside this sac then, we've got our amniotic fluid, which is a careful balancing act, because if it's too much or too little, we can run into some problems. We've got our umbilical cord here, coming up to the chorionic cavity, to the chorionic side, where it's going to be connecting to its mom. This is where our nutrient exchange magic is going to happen for this infant. So if you ever heard of like chorio, that's what they're talking about, an infection of the chorionic side, or a maternal infection, which again can lead to the baby because they're so close. And we've got a few things up here to take a little bit of a closer look at. Okay, so this is going to be our baby. So we talked about our umbilical cord a little bit, so let's draw it out. So we're going to say get that out of here. We've got an umbilical cord coming up. So we essentially have this one vein, the umbilical vein. We're going to do it right, so we're saying we've got one V. Let's make this one different color. So we're going to do red for this guy. And we've got this artery that's going around, branching out, coming along, surrounding that, and it's going to come up here as well. And that's where a lot of our gas exchange is going to happen, our nutrient exchange, and we have two of them, so we're going to take another one and make sure it's coming up here as well. Same thing, it's going to be branching up with here. It's also going to be branching up here, branching up here. There's a whole bunch of these little veins and vessels. So if we aren't able to form these appropriately, we're going to cause some problems, or there'll be some problems with this infant. But let's draw it then. So we've got, draw some circles here, because these are vessels where they're coming out. be the other side. We've got our jelly inside. So we've got our umbilical cord here. It comes up. It's going to come through here. We're going to pick up our nutrients up here, and then we're going to come down and exchange back to the infant. So we got a couple things going on. Up in the mom's side, we have these little guys here. So this little group from here to here is what's called the intervillous space. So that is where a lot of these vessels are going to be exchanging what's going on. And then this is going to have something that needs to go into the mom. So we have these little branches of vessels here that are going to be going to our uterine artery because it's got to figure out some way to get nutrients and blood exchange going on. These are just the spiral arteries. And these are going to come up and help connect to mom, where everything's going to happen. We've got our, on this side, these little branches that are coming up to pick up our gases are the villus chorion. Villus chorion. Okay. So that's essentially what's going down at the very microscopic, not microscopic, but very small level for these guys. So I can't get this to go back. But anyways, we have the mom, placenta, umbilical cord to the baby, and it's surrounded by amniotic fluid. 0 to 2 weeks is going to be implantation. If anything goes wrong there, baby will be spontaneously aborted. Weeks 2 to 8 are the critical period because cells are becoming what they're going to eventually become, and if something goes wrong here, we'll have our congenital anomalies. The placenta is important for making sure the infant has its nutrition, its gas exchange, nutrient, immunoglobulins, and then endocrine functions that maintain the placenta. The umbilical cord has 2 arteries and 1 vein. Some of the common anomalies are going to be fistulas or omphalocele. You can also have a single umbilical artery or single vessel cord. And yeah, that's the big stuff for this one. So hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you soon.